Hello and welcome to this very special show that we are organizing on the Kargil conflict 16 years later. And we have with us 4 distinguished guests, each of them having played a very important role in that conflict. On my right is General Malik, former Chief of the Indian Army, and one who has, to a great extent, influenced the course of the battles on the ground. And with him, we have Lieutenant General Mohinder Puri, who, as Major General Mohinder Puri and GOC 8 Mountain Dave, was very much responsible for some of the major operations that took place between Dras and the Moscow Valley area in the Kargil conflict. On my left is Ambassador G. Parthasarathy, former Indian High Commissioner to Pakistan, and in recent years, one of the best known experts in India on India-Pakistan relations. And finally, Air Marshal Ahluwalia, who played an extremely important role and does get some personal credit for the specialized bombing that our Mirages carried out under his guidance and leadership in the conflict. Before we begin the discussions on the Kargil conflict, it is important for us to take a look at the turbulent relationship between India and Pakistan since 1947.
The Kargil conflict saw the world's newest nuclear powers at war. But it certainly wasn't the only time the two neighbors had engaged in an armed conflict. With Kashmir as a flashpoint, India and Pakistan had gone to war in 1947 and 65, and then over the liberation of Bangladesh in 1971.
There's a kind of history which has been recreated, by the Pakistanis, a grievance which has been created that Kashmir is meant to be part of Pakistan. That's simply not true. And legally, I think India's position remains that all of Jammu and Kashmir is part of India.
1972 saw a breakthrough when the two sides signed the Shimla Agreement, agreeing to settle their differences through peaceful bilateral means. It also led to the conversion of the ceasefire line into the line of control. But by 1984, both sides were engaged in yet another conflict to gain control of the Siachen Glacier that lay beyond the line of control in no man's land. In 1999, Pakistan's Army Chief General Pervez Musharraf, with a few confidants, launched a series of intrusions along the line of control north of Kargil, taking India by surprise and setting the stage for the Kargil conflict.
Mr. Parthasarathy, sir, my first question is to you, that the conflict came close on the heels of Prime Minister Vajpayee's visit to Lahore in February 1999, just when the world thought that both countries were actually willing to put their past behind and move on. So what was the motivation for Musharraf to do something like this, especially so when the entire civilian establishment led by Nawaz Sharif was looking for peace with India?
The assessment that you have just given, that the entire civilian establishment was looking for peace with India, is questionable in my view. To the best of our information, Nawaz was briefed at the GHQ in October and even visited Skardu. So he was very much a part of the picture. When the conflict broke, it was his ministers and he himself who led the propaganda onslaught about so-called Mujahideen, more so than the military. It was Mushahid Hussain, his information minister, who led that blitzkrieg. So let us be very clear. Nawaz was in it. Secondly, I think we looked at it not just as normalization with Pakistan. We were under huge international pressure, including under Resolution 1172 of the Security Council, which threatened international mediation and a UN role. So it was in our interest to get things at least to be seeming to be moving. And I think the Lahore summit was useful to us in the sense that the world understood us as a serious nation in the quest of peace. Pakistan exposed itself.
The debate will still go on, and it's not yet settled even within Pakistan that who was really on board and who wasn't. But there have been written records, and I quote from some of the books written by Western authors. Musharraf and 4 others essentially planned this operation. And Nawaz Sharif apparently was brought into the loop only in April 99 or beyond. But what do you think singularly would have been the reason why we were, as a nation, caught napping? There was inadequate intelligence that was available, and that obviously had implications on your operations and on the lives lost.
That's a fact. There were no intelligence reports. If you go through the JSC reports or IB reports or RAW reports, they kept on talking in terms of mujahideen, jihadis, crossing the line of control in J&K, even opposite Kargil, but nobody ever mentioned that the Pakistan Army was preparing to cross the line of control. So much so that in some reports they categorically said that we don't think that Pakistan Army is going to do this kind of a thing. And we can put some blame on the intelligence agencies, but I think we should also put some blame on the troops on the ground who should have done a better job of surveillance on the ground along the line of control. I think they were also, some of them, there was slackness in patrolling that area.
Marshal sir, we had both within the IAF and with our intelligence agencies a certain amount of aerial surveillance capability. Who really should have given those aerial pictures? Why didn't anything come across to our forces well in time in terms of aerial reconnaissance?
Responsibility for ISR, the intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, lies with RAW, because RAW has also
the ARC,
an element called ARC, Aviation Research Center. So as per the charter, it is their responsibility to ensure that whatever strategic reconnaissance is done, they are the ones to provide the information for that.
I think we have to accept the fact that Air Force as well as the Army, they lack technology on surveillance. We did not have night vision devices, we did not have radars, etc. Similarly, they did not have the SAR capability.
And this was something, sir, which has been recommended by the Kargil Review Committee, that we need to be more techno-savvy.
So conceptually, that's the biggest lesson. I would say lesson number one.
Good.
The responsibility
we need to,
for ISR must be clearly defined. It is the Air Force responsibility anywhere in the world for strategic reconnaissance.
General Puri sir, you were commanding troops on the ground. Did you feel that the situation as it suddenly began to unfurl left you with a lot of questions that you needed to be answered when you got your first set of alerts from Army headquarters that you need to begin preparing for a conflict?
When I inducted the division on 1st of June, there was a fog of war. We were not clear, like the chief has also mentioned. There was no intelligence of any worthwhile merit. So we had to really prepare for a first operation, which was tunneling. It was dominating the NH1 and it was interdicting us in a bad way. We prepared ourselves properly. We inducted the additional artillery which came from the planes, and we had the Bofors. We tried out the Bofors in the direct firing role, and we finally launched the operation on 12th of June, night 12/13th, and that's when we got the first success.
What marks the Kargil conflict out as different and a landmark event in Indian history is the conflicts that our troops had to fight to capture each post, sometimes in hand-to-hand combat in some of the most difficult and demanding terrain in the world.
The terrain of what became the battlefield north of Kargil on the line of control is inhospitable at the best of times. Jagged icy peaks towering to a height of 18,000 feet, with freezing cold temperatures and harsh wind speeds a characteristic of the area. The Pakistani incursions and seizure of Indian posts had taken place at various places along a 160-kilometer long stretch of ridges overlooking an important road link, the National Highway 1A, that connects Srinagar to Leh, that soon came under heavy Pakistani shelling.
General Malik sir, You have been on record to say that because the troops were inducted in with minimum acclimatization at very short notice, often ill-equipped, and you went on record to say, but we will still fight with what we have. Tell us about the kind of situation that was prevailing in South Block. You did make a collective briefing of the three services chiefs to the Cabinet Committee on Security. How did this happen?
The briefing of the CCS took place on 23rd, but a day before that, the three chiefs had got together, and we had all decided that we will go together. We will work out our military strategy, all three of us combined in that fashion. There were problems with us. The intelligence agencies were still insisting that these are jihadis, but our latest reports from the ground indicated that there were no jihadis, these were Pakistan Army. And as you know, the rules of engagement are different for jihadis, countering jihadis, and countering the army, regular army from the other side. So we decided that we will change the rules of engagement, we will give those directions accordingly, and Army, Navy and Air Force will all work out our strategy together.
Mr. Parthasarathy, sir, the jihadi aspect takes me back to Pakistan, because the line that Musharraf and his commanders were weaving out in the public, and apparently by all written records, the Pakistani media also hook, line and sinker bought this line, that there was some kind of a jihadi effort that was taking place at 18,000 feet altitudes, when I haven't heard of any jihadi insurrection that takes place at those kind of freezing heights. And what they were trying to liberate there on those hilltops is anybody's guess. But quite frankly, this was the kind of line that was being pushed in Pakistan. Did you get that feeling sitting in Pakistan?
There were two lines being pushed. One, that in this area the line of control was not properly defined. This is what Pakistan was telling the world. We got to know of it, and there were some 70 odd maps of the line of control signed just after the 71 conflict, and we circulated the exact definition of those lines, saying Pakistan was lying. So to the world community, we established the line of control had been violated. But I want to say this one thing very clearly. The Prime Minister was very clear that wars are fought for a political objective. And we fought Kargil primarily that we could not only take back what they had, but we'd also do it showing maximum restraint. Not crossing
that came across very well,
the line of control, either by our forces or by the Air Force. The Pakistan military had somehow come to the conclusion that after 10 years of fighting insurgency in Jammu and Kashmir,
we were exhausted.
That our army was exhausted and would not have the dum.
We would go. Welcome back. In this special show where we are looking at the Kargil conflict 16 years later, there is a certain degree of importance that we need to pay, not just to the man on the ground, the bravery of our soldiers, which was phenomenal, but also of the role of the Indian Air Force and the diplomatic effort that went into turning the tide in India's favor.
As in any other high-altitude warfare, India relied heavily on its tough infantrymen, supported by massive artillery shelling to evict the enemy from their vantage points along the line of control, from the Mashko Valley to Turtok. But the credit for crucial and targeted support to destroy the Pakistan-held bunkers also goes to the Indian Air Force.
We developed some new techniques, and one of them was bombing from over the clouds. Fighter aircraft don't normally do this. The initial effectiveness of our air actors could not have been very good, because after all they were a handful of people, they would hide behind boulders, and therefore we were firing, they were getting petrified, but I don't think we were actually killing them. And but it can be very unnerving.
Around 60 helicopters and aircraft of the Indian Air Force were called into action, and despite a few initial losses to shoulder-fired missiles, the Indian Air Force was successful in destroying Pakistan's supply lines, logistical bases and the position held by its troops along the line of control.
General Malik sir, what did you feel were the concerns of the Air Force and how were you able to overcome that?
No, I wouldn't put it that it was only a concern of the Air Force. I think it was a concern of both the political leaders as well as the Air Force, because they did not want to escalate the war. They were all wanting to keep it contained.
Yes.
And we didn't know the extent of infiltration at that time. There was a considerable fog of war. It's only when I went to that area and I got the correct picture, and when I briefed my colleagues, including the Air Chief, we all agreed that yes, situation being what it is, we need to work together. So thereafter, there was no looking back.
Air Marshal sir, what did you feel were the initial challenges? How did you learn the lessons? And how did you modify the situation to get such air dominance so quickly?
The problem was that the kind of terrain that we had, you know, the Himalayas, which are extending up to 26,000 feet, and now, you know, the valleys are running, you know, northeast to northwest to southeast, and the valleys from the other side, there's a gradual slope, and the valleys are coming, you know, the Mashko, Dras, Khaskar, all coming in very conveniently for the Pakis. And all their, you know, sangars, these are boulders that go from the other side of the slopes. So targeting was a major issue. Then you put in the Stinger over there, so you had to now elevate the height of operations to somewhere around 26,000 feet. Now can you imagine, nowhere in the history of air power has any air force or any platform delivered in the kind of terrain that you have in the Kargil sector, that is the Himalayas, ever happened. And the Air Force did it, and did it proudly. The question was, what do we use? We could, using MiGs, 21s, 27. However, it was the Mirage 2000 that could now deliver from 30,000 feet.
Pakistanis allege that our aircrafts cross the LOC. India says Pakistani aircrafts cross the LOC. To some extent, maybe operationally, and I'd like you to clear the air, you may need to have engaged the targets by crossing the LOC because you could not probably get a good view on the target. So what is it?
It's a line of control, an imaginary line from this ridge to that ridge to that ridge. If you go up in the air and you're operating at 800, 900 kilometers an hour, that's about 15 kilometers you know, in a minute. I don't think you can see any line. So the question of going on the other side, and then I might also tell you that most of the targets were on the other side of the LOC. I mean, they had come in here, but they were facing northwards. So targeting them from this side, southern side of the LOC, or where they were, would have been difficult. Now, I leave it to your imagination whether we stuck to the LOC or we didn't.
Point of this difficulty in taking a circuit and hitting these targets that has been mentioned by Air Marshal Ahluwalia, we took up with the cabinet and we specifically asked permission, the three military chiefs, that can the Air Force go a few kilometers on the other side to be able to engage these targets, and we were told no.
General Puri, you were with your troops on the ground. To what extent, bravery apart, pure individual gallantry of units and individuals apart, air power and air support other than the Bofors fire altered the situation for your troops on the ground?
No, I think I don't want to create a conflict between the army and the Air Force. But on ground, the morale effect was tremendous. When the Air Force came, the morale of the troops was absolutely on the rise. And while on the Pakistan side, the effect was totally different. But as far as engaging the target was concerned, I had my doubts whether they were effectively engaged to support the ground operations.
But there are lots of challenges and limitations at that speed, that
I'm not
height.
denying that.
Didn't the responsibility also lie to some of your troops on the ground to guide the Air Force onto the target?
Yes, definitely. I'm not denying any of this. I'm saying in the initial stages, the infantry was also in the dark. We were not acclimatized to fight on those heights. And similarly, the Air Force also was not trained to fight on those heights. It took us time. But what I'm trying to say is that in pinpointing a target, the artillery was definitely more effective than the Air Force. And when the troops went in, it is the artillery support which we banked on.
Mantadalo, Tiger Hill, Mashko Nala, 4388, we just had this discussion.
Yeah,
4388 was the next biggest admin and logistics camp. It was hit and hit hard by the Mirages and all other aircraft.
Sir, General Malik sir, do you feel it is fair, and why should it be the case of only honoring those who get awards based on citations, because there are many, many acts of gallantry which go unsung, unheard, unnoticed.
Maroof,
what's your take on it as Chief, sir?
Maroof, I totally agree with you. While one appreciates the bravery act which came to notice through the citations and people got their bravery awards, I must say that everyone who fought in Kargil sector, particularly the young soldiers and the young officers and leaders like General Mohinder Puri, who was commanding the division that time, they did a brilliant job. I always noticed that the morale in South Block was generally low, but whenever I went to visit them, which was almost every week, I found their morale was high, and in fact they affected my morale also.
Mr. Parthasarathy, it is said that Nawaz Sharif flew in panic into Washington on 4th of July. It was a holiday there. He was not invited to White House. He imposed himself on Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton told him that as far as I'm concerned, the question of Kashmir is settled. It's with India. So what was the mood in Pakistan when it began to dawn on the people that they tried hard once again and lost?
I think there was one of despondency and one of a blame game. The civilian leadership blamed the military blamed the civilian leadership, and when General Musharraf went to visit units, he found morale low and young officers questioning him, which was unthinkable. And it was in those circumstances that the coup took place.
In fact, we'll have to end here because this has been a rather enlightening and fruitful discussion for people who actually influence the course of the conflict there. But I think the most important lesson of the Kargil conflict for me was that Pakistan went to challenge the sanctity of the line of control. But unfortunately for them, and with America's intervention, the line of control has become sanctified as the de facto boundary between India and Pakistan and Jammu and Kashmir. Thank you very much, sirs, for being with us on this show. And thank you very much for watching this program.